Hi, I'm Lisa, and in this video, I'll be talking about how breathing is controlled by changes in pH. So, breathing is not only controlled by changes in oxygen levels, but also in changes in pH. So, the primary receptors that detect changes in pH are called the central chemoreceptors and the peripheral chemoreceptors. So the central chemoreceptors are located in the medulla oblongata, which is right here. This is the medulla oblongata. I have the central chemoreceptors drawn in yellow. So the central chemoreceptors respond to changes in the hydrogen ion levels in the cerebrospinal fluid. So the change in hydrogen ion levels within the cerebrospinal fluid. And the peripheral chemoreceptors are actually located in the carotid and the aortic bodies that are located right above the heart. The carotid and aortic bodies above the heart. So in these signals, they send signals through the carotid bodies through the glossopharyngeal nerve. That's also known as cranial nerve 9. And then for the signals through the aortic bodies, they use the vagus nerve, which is the cranial nerve 10. So, like I was saying, the medulla oblongata is located right here where the central chemoreceptors are located. In here, we also have two different respiratory centers. This one is known as the dorsal respiratory center, and this one is called the ventral respiratory center. So as we know, why it's called dorsal respiratory center is because this is located on the dorsal side of the anatomical body, and the ventral is located in front, near the front of the anatomical body. So the ventral respiratory center is the primary generator of the respiratory rhythm, while the dorsal respiratory center would modify the ventral respiratory center, i.e. with a change in pH or emotional regulations. In this part of the brainstem, this is called pons. Pons holds the final respiratory center known as the pontine respiratory center. And the pontine respiratory center regulates both the dorsal and the ventral respiratory center. So how ventilation occurs is that there are two different neurons, one known as the inspiration I neuron and the other known as the expiration E neuron. The inspiration I neuron first fires for 2 seconds, and that's going to signal the signal integrating centers. Spinal integrating center are going to send signals to the different nerves responsible for the muscle movements. And those two different nerves are known as the phrenic nerve and the intercostal nerve. The phrenic nerve is then going to create muscle movement at the diaphragm. And the intercostal nerves are going to initiate muscle contraction within the intercostal muscles. So the two main muscles responsible for ventilation are the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. So what if the blood becomes too acidic? That is called acidosis. So once it reaches acidosis, that means that the blood pH is too low. In order to counteract that, what the respiratory system is going to do is going to increase the rate and the depth of breathing in order to expel out the carbon dioxide, which is then going to raise the pH. If the blood is too alkaline, the respiratory system is then going to respond by slowing the rate of the breathing, which is then going to retain the CO2 in the blood. Okay, so let's recap on this. So we have two different chemoreceptors that respond to changes in pH. Those are called the central chemoreceptors and the peripheral chemoreceptors. The central chemoreceptors are located within the medulla oblongata of the brainstem, and that's going to send signals to the ventral respiratory system, which is then going to send signals to the signaling integrating centers. Those are then going to send signals to the phrenic nerve and the intercostal nerves, which are then going to initiate muscle contractions within the diaphragm and the intercostal muscle.